Hello and welcome to Eastern Roman history. Basil II and Constantine VIII succeeded their father, Romanus II, upon his death on the 15th of March AD 963. At the age of 5 and 2 respectively, and with their sister Anna having just been born, a regency council was tasked with running the Eastern Roman Empire until the co-emperors were old enough to rule themselves. The council consisted of the Augusta Theophano, Joseph Bringas, the Grand Chamberlain of the Palace, and chief advisor to the deceased emperor, the Patriarch, and the high officials Simeon the Proto-Secretist, and Michael the Financial Logothete. In April 963, Nikephoros Phokas, Domestikos of the East, returned to Constantinople from his victorious expedition against the Hamdanid Emirate of Aleppo, where he and his second-in-command had sacked Aleppo and broken its power. It had been a shock to this bringer of victory to hear of the young emperor's death, and so he had returned to Constantinople to take stock of his position. Nikephoros was amazingly popular, with him being known as Nikephoros the Conqueror in the Roman sources, and later on, Luidprand of Cremona reported, "As Nikephoros, like some crawling monster, walked along, the singers began to cry in adulation, 'Behold, Nikephoros our prince, the pale death of the Saracens!'" The Domestikos was granted a triumph for his destruction of Aleppo, and was confirmed as Domestikos of the East. While the leading general of the day might be a threat, the regency took steps to mitigate this danger by having Nikephoros sign a solemn oath not to rebel against Basil or Constantine. He was also promised the regency would consult with him, essentially trying to bring him into the regency council. Our sources start to show their loyalties because disparaging arguments are made by both sides. John Skylitzes, our anti-Phokas source, says that Nikephoros immediately decided to revolt after Romanus II died. Leo the Deacon, our pro-Phokas source, says Bringas tried to stop Nikephoros celebrating his triumph, a decision which was politically dangerous and would be counterproductive if, ultimately, Bringas was trying to placate Nikephoros enough not to threaten the regency of Basil and Constantine. The theories of both sources are probably untrue. Nikephoros arrived in Caesarea on the 2nd of July 963, and was proclaimed emperor by his officers, led by his second-in-command, the Strategos of Armeniacon, John Simiskes. Nikephoros then sent a letter announcing his elevation to the Regency Council, Patriarch, and Senate. Leo the Deacon paraphrases what Nikephoros wrote: "That they should accept him as emperor, and he would protect the sons of Lord Romanus until they reached maturity, and would oversee their physical training, and, moreover, he would greatly benefit the state, and expand the sway of Roman rule through his military exploits. If they did not wish this, they would subsequently regret their stupidity when matters should be determined by the sword and bloodshed, and that there is no opportunity for justification for those who have chosen the worse course over the better." Bringas naturally refused the usurper's manifesto, and started preparing for sword and bloodshed. Nikephoros left John as Domestikos of the East, and marched with his mighty army westwards, towards Constantinople. John Skylitzes says that Nikephoros, a pious ascetic, lusted after Theophano, and they sent each other secret messages, but there is no evidence this happened. And since Skylitzes' history is generally hostile towards Nikephoros, we should see this for what it is: propaganda designed to make both Nikephoros and the increasingly scandalized empress look bad. Bringas could not accept the terms of this upstart, and immediately started preparing Constantinople for an attack. Nikephoros the Conqueror was declared a public enemy by the eunuch Bringas. The octogenarian Bardas Phokas the Elder, the father of Nikephoros and Leo Phokas, sought sanctuary in St. Sophia in Constantinople. Leo Phokas disguised himself as a labourer and escaped the city through a sewage pipe before crossing the straits to join his brother. Bringas summoned the Macedonian thematic army, led by the Domestikos of the West, Marianus Argyros, to Constantinople. However, public opinion was with Nikephoros, whereas Bringas's own attempts at gathering popular support were unsuccessful. Bringas, although very competent, suffered from a total lack of charisma, a deficiency in oratory, and was heavy-handed in a crisis. During the night of the 8th of August, he sent some of Argyros's troops to arrest the aged Bardus Phokas at St. Sophia. A mob had gathered to protect the affable old man from the creatures of the eunuch and clashed with them at the entrance. The following morning, Bringas himself went to speak to the patriarch. He shouted at the crowd and threatened to besiege the church. He also ordered all of the bakers to stop baking bread. When word of this reached the mob the next day, the 10th of August, a riot broke out, and the Domestikos Marianus Argyros was killed when a woman threw a pot from her balcony, which smashed over his head. Basil Lekapanos, the previous Parakoimemenos and eunuch, and nemesis of Joseph Bringas, sprung into action. He and 3,000 of his associates joined the rioters and started targeting the homes of Bringas's supporters, and also burned down the mansion of Bringas himself. Joseph Bringas fled to St. Sophia, begging for sanctuary. Bringas was beaten. On the 16th of August AD 963, Nikephoros Phokas arrived in Constantinople and was crowned co-emperor with Basil II and Constantine VIII, keeping to his oath. The regency of Joseph Bringas had lasted 5 months. Joseph Bringas's life was spared, but he was exiled to a monastery in Bithynia until his death in 965. It is a curious case for the Eastern Roman Empire during the 10th century AD that history should in fact repeat itself. In the beginning of the 10th century, the ruling family of the empire, the Macedonian dynasty, was destabilized when the emperor, Leo VI, an intelligent and successful monarch, died and left the throne in the hands of his ailing brother, and once he died 13 months later, his little boy Constantine VII. The Regency Council, set up to run the empire in his stead, was overthrown by a coup led by the admiral Romanus Lekapanos. Typically, usurpation in the Eastern Roman Empire was a case of kill or be killed, but Romanus I led the way for a new method of usurpation. Usurpation, where the usurping upstart took his place as a senior emperor alongside the legitimate junior emperor. Much the same happened 40 years later. The Emperor Romanus II, the son of Constantine VII, died after a mortal illness. His wife and chief minister led a regency council to rule the empire for her 2 sons, Basil II and Constantine VIII. Within months, the regency council was overthrown by a coup led by the general Nikephoros Phokas, who was dubbed with the unique epithet the White Death of the Saracens. Like Romanus I, Nikephoros II, instead of doing away with the Macedonian boys, became the senior emperor and ruled alongside them. This video shall explore his short but eventful reign. If you enjoy this video, remember to like and subscribe to Eastern Roman History. My gratitude to my generous patrons on Patreon. And now let us continue. Nikephoros Phokas was the son, grandson, brother, and uncle of renowned military commanders of the Phokas family. He promised the Patriarch, Senate, and people of Constantinople that he would rule as a senior emperor on behalf of Emperors Basil II and Constantine VIII, but not found a dynasty of his own. To honour his father, Bardus Phokas the Elder was granted the title of Caesar, a title second in rank to the emperor. John Simiskes, the lieutenant and principal backer of Nikephoros Phokas, was promoted to Domestikos of the East. Leo Phokas was appointed financial logotheti and bestowed the title of Kuropalates. Basil Lekapanos, the great uncle of the emperors and another key supporter of Nikephoros II, became Parakoimemenos, Grand Chamberlain of the Palace. Nikephoros also invented a new title, Prodrus of the Senate, for him. Nikephoros himself was described by Leo the Deacon. His complexion tended to be swarthy rather than fair. His hair was thick and dark, beneath bushy eyebrows. His nose was neither narrow nor wide, ending in a slight hook. His beard was of moderate size, sprouting grey hairs on his cheeks. He was stooped in stature and sturdy, with extremely broad chest and shoulders, indeed, like the legendary Hercules in courage and strength. But almost as soon as he became emperor, there was a controversy, something that was a constant theme throughout his reign and legacy. When the emperor asked to marry the Empress Dowager Theophano on the 20th of September AD 963, he ran the risk of breaking canon law. Nikephoros II was a widower and had become a vegetarian as an act of piety to mourn the death of his son, whom had perished in a hunting accident some years before. The marriage of this widow and widower would only be allowed by the Patriarch Polyeuctus if they performed penance for 2 years. The Patriarch also denounced the marriage because Nikephoros II was the godfather of Basil II and Constantine VIII, which in the Orthodox Church was considered the same as a biological relationship, and therefore spiritually incestuous. A church committee formed to determine the validity of the marriage, and found in favour of the imperial couple. On the eastern frontier, the Hamdanids of Aleppo, the empire's main enemy at the time, having begun to recover from the stinging blow the emperor had dealt them back in AD 962, launched a raid against Melitene in September 963. In October, the Arabs of Tarsus pillaged their way to Iconium. The local strategos managed to catch them in an ambush, inflicting heavy casualties upon them. However, the resurgence of the Hamdanids in Tarsus were the aggressive acts of a paper tiger. Meanwhile, as Nikephoros II consolidated his position in Constantinople, the emperor prepared an expedition to aid a Christian revolt in Sicily. The Christian population on the island rebelled against their Fatimid overlords in the city of Rametta. In AD 963, the Fatimids besieged the city, which then called for aid from the Eastern Roman Empire. Nikephoros II used the occasion to break the tribute payments they previously paid to the Fatimids. He equipped a fleet and sent it under the command of a eunuch called Nikitas to relieve Rametta. They landed near Messina, and then the army under the command of Manuel, the nephew of Nikephoros II, led his forces to relieve the city. However, they were caught in an ambush and routed. Manuel himself was killed. The Romans fled back to their ships, but a Fatimid fleet arrived and sank the Roman navy, and Admiral Nikitas was captured. In May AD 965, Rametta fell to the Fatimids. Its population was led into slavery and replaced by Arab colonists. The expedition to Sicily was an unmitigated disaster for the Romans. It wasted a golden opportunity to restore the island to imperial control, and undoubtedly was responsible for part of the economy drive of Nikephoros II's reign, which was to pay for this lost expedition. In December 963, John Zimisces attacked Cilicia. He was victorious against the Tarsian army, totally annihilating the Saracen force. The slaughter was so great that the hill the battle was fought on was dubbed the Mountain of Blood. Zimisces besieged the city of Mopsuestia, but abandoned it due to an ongoing famine in the region, which left his army with limited food supplies. The Eastern Romans returned to friendly territory, burning the suburbs of Mopsuestia, Adana, and Tarsus as they left. In AD 964, an Aleppan army arrived too late to aid Tarsus and was disbanded due to poor food supplies. The Hamdanids negotiated with the Eastern Roman Empire, which effectively resulted in their withdrawal from Aleppo and ceased supporting the Emirate of Tarsus. With Aleppo neutralized, nothing could stop the Romans now. In AD 964, with stability restored in Constantinople, Nikephoros II resumed his campaigns against the Saracens. He was accompanied by the Empress Theophano and the 2 junior emperors. He began with punitive attacks against Cilicia, capturing Anazarbus and Adana, with some of his detachments raiding as far as Antioch. Nikephoros II's army withdrew to Caesarea at the end of the campaigning season. Cilicia had been laid waste and was now diplomatically isolated. Since Cilicia was on the brink of conquest, the emperor decided to deal with the last link in the chain, Cyprus. In AD 965, the Eastern Roman Imperial Navy, commanded by Nikitas Kalkoutsis, was sent to eject the Arabs from Cyprus. Cyprus had been a shared demilitarized zone between the Eastern Roman Empire and Arab world for centuries. Both empires shared the tax revenues, but neither power actually controlled the island. This condominion was ended after Kalkoutsis sank the Egyptian fleet defending it and brought the island fully under Roman control. Armenian colonists were then resettled there, and a new theme was created. With Cyprus fully back in Roman hands, Nikephoros II, Leo Phokas and John Tzimiskes led the army from Caesarea into Cilicia. The governor of Tarsus and Mopsuestia offered to surrender, but the emperor refused. Leo Phokas led a detachment to conquer Tarsus, while Nikephoros and Tzimiskes besieged Mopsuestia. On the 13th of July 965, Mopsuestia fell to the Romans, and the population was largely put to the sword or dragged off into slavery. The emperor then joined his brother at Tarsus, which surrendered on the 16th of August. An Egyptian relief force sent by sea arrived too late and was chased off by the imperial navy. In the aftermath, the Muslims of Tarsus were given a choice: either convert to Christianity and stay, or leave under escort to Antioch. As this went on, Roman and Armenian citizens were resettled in the area, with small Armenian themes being established all over Cilicia. The imperial army then conquered Germaniacia. After 300 years, Cilicia was Roman territory once again. Upon their return to the capital, John Tzimiskes was dismissed from service, being placed under house arrest for conspiring against the emperor. Meanwhile, in Italy, the catapan of the themes of Longobardia and Calabria, Nikephoros Hexaconiates ordered the construction of ships for an expedition against the Sicilians. For whatever reason, the shipwright at Rossano rebelled, burned their vessels, and killed the local captain. This rebellion against the requisition of ships may have been a local response to the possibility of Arab reprisals so soon after the failure 2 years before. However, the insurrection dissipated thanks to the intervention of a local saint, Nilos, who placated the concerns of the rebels. Regardless, Hexaconiates took command of his thematic fleet and sailed to Reggio, where he engaged the Fatimid navy in battle. It was a disaster. The Arabs sank his fleet and forced him to retreat. There would be no further attacks against Sicily during Nikephoros II's reign. In October 965, Nikephoros II returned to Constantinople from his conquests, celebrating a triumph for his victories. The gilded gates of Tarsus and Mopsuestia were erected as victory monuments in Constantinople, and many of the battle standards from fallen battalions of Thamata were at last restored to their homeland. The victory over Tarsus was significant to both the government in Constantinople and also to Roman citizens themselves. To them it represented an end to the annual jihad, the yearly roll of the dice that perhaps they would be killed, carted off into slavery, or defiled by Saracen soldiers. In a church in Cavasin, in Cappadocia, there is a wall painting of Nikephoros II, Leo Phokas, Caesar Bardus Phokas, Empress Theophano, and John Tzimiskes. These were the faces of the men and women that had brought about a new Pax Romana. For the first time in centuries, Anatolia was safe. After the conquest of Cilicia, the emperor sent emissaries to the Syriac Patriarch of Antioch, John VII. The Syriac Patriarch is the head of the Miaphysite Christians of the East, who rejected the Council of Chalcedon in AD 451. Nikephoros II offered toleration to the Miaphysites if the Patriarch of Antioch relocated to Melitene. John VII agreed and moved to the theme of Melitene, with many Syriac Christians settling in the area. In AD 966, now that tensions had abated, Saif al-Dawla, the sword of the Hamdanids, conducted a prisoner exchange with the Eastern Roman Empire on the 23rd of June of that year. The Eastern Roman army had captured so many Arabian nobles, such as the warrior poet Abu Firas, in recent years, that Saif al-Dawla actually ran out of Christian prisoners to exchange. This forced him to pay money for the rest of the prisoners. He had to pawn his regal jewels and send his secretary as a hostage as collateral because he also ran out of money. The Hamdanids had been defeated in battle and now diplomatically humiliated. The conquests of Nikephoros II and the defeat of Saif al-Dawla resulted in brutal reprisals. In AD 966, a Muslim mob, thinking the emperor might invade Palestine, burned the Patriarch of Jerusalem alive and torched the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. In AD 967, the Patriarch of Antioch was assassinated for the same reason. In AD 968, to compound the bloodthirsty hysterics of the Saracens, a force of Khorasanis arrived to conduct the jihad against Roman territory. An army led by Stratopedarch Peter the Eunuch, a household retainer of Nikephoros II's, fought and bested in the Cilician plains, capturing their leader. The city of Antioch was the cause of renewed hostilities between the Eastern Romans and the Hamdanids. An anti-Hamdanid faction of nobles within the city made overtures to the emperor, asking to become their suzerain if they protected them from the Hamdanids. Saif al-Dawla heard of this and imprisoned the faction members. In response, Nikephoros II led an expedition against Antioch. On the 6th of October, he stopped at Hierapolis and placed it under siege. The people of Hierapolis surrendered to him a tile imprinted with the face of Christ on it, called the Keramidion, in exchange for a Roman withdrawal. His army then marched on Antioch. However, a lack of supplies and the city's immensely strong defences prevented Nikephoros II pursuing his goal of capturing the city. On the 24th of January, AD 967, Nikephoros returned to Constantinople with the Holy Keramidion. Although Nikephoros II had achieved very little during his invasion of Antioch, on the Armenian frontier there was much better news. Prince Ashot III of Taron died and left his principality to his sons. However, they decided to gift their realm to the Romans in exchange for titles, lands, and a place in the Eastern Roman aristocracy. Once it was all agreed, Eastern Roman administrators were dispatched and turned Taron into a set of themes, with the princes serving as the new strategoi. The new territory in Taron brought with it new threats. The Romans were now adjacent to multiple Christian Armenian principalities, as well as small Muslim emirates scattered throughout the region. A new command, called a ducat, was created by grouping a number of different Armenian themes together. This was so the military forces and logistics in the area could be better coordinated and act with greater autonomy. Later in AD 968, Bardas Phokas the Younger, Duke of Chaldea, led his Thamata forces against the Aponic Emirate, sacking the city of Manzikert. Meanwhile in Italy, the Fatimid Caliph al-Mu'iz prepared to invade Egypt and opened negotiations with the Romans. Nikephoros II paid a ransom, releasing Admiral Nikitas and other officers taken during the disastrous Sicilian campaigns. The emperor sent a sword purporting to be one of the Prophet Muhammad's as a gift. Lastly, the Romans and Fatimids signed a truce between the two empires. It so happens that Admiral Nikitas, while a prisoner, copied out sermons from Saints Basil the Great and Gregory Nazianzus, the manuscripts of which have survived to this day. Regarding events in Byzantine Italy proper, in AD 962 the King of Germany, Otto the Great, was crowned Imperator and Augustus by the Pope in Rome, reviving the Holy Roman Empire that had essentially collapsed with the breakup of the Frankish Empire. Otto I was determined to bring Italy into a new Roman Empire. After allying with the Lombard duchies in southern Italy, the Germans invaded the theme of Apulia, AD 968, perhaps taking advantage of the theme's recent difficulties with the Saracens of Sicily. Emperor Otto besieged the thematic capital of Bari, but abandoned it due to the city's strong defences. Otto I then sent his minion, Luidprand of Cremona, to Constantinople to negotiate with Nikephoros II, who wrote an account of his embassy to Constantinople. His mission was to arrange a marriage between Otto I's heir and the Byzantine princess, Anna the Purple-born. Moreover, the king from Germany wanted Nikephoros II to recognise his imperial title in exchange for giving up his claims on Apulia. Luidprand failed in his task. The Byzantine emperor threatened retribution against the perfidy of the dukes of Capua and Benevento. Furthermore, gold was dispatched to fund the cause of the deposed king of Italy, Adalbert. The whole affair was a diplomatic disaster for Otto the Great. In AD 969, Otto I initiated a campaign against the theme of Calabria, besieging Corsano. The defences there held, so the emperor marched against Bovino in Apulia, where he met with similar failure. In May, Otto I withdrew, leaving the Duke of Capua to continue the siege, but he was defeated and captured by the Catapan of Italy, Eugenius, commanding local forces. Eugenius went on a counteroffensive, besieged Capua, and captured Salerno. However, at the moment of Eugenius's triumph, he was recalled to the capital to answer allegations of cruelty for his tenure as Catapan. Otto I returned to continue the war, but the fighting remained inconclusive. The ambitions of Otto I in conquering southern Italy had been dashed. While the emperor won a throng of victories in the east and the medley of outcomes in the west, his internal policies caused unrest. He ceased paying subsidies to churches and monasteries from the exchequer. Churches were banned from buying new land, so those same small holdings could be purchased by soldiers or freemen. The church was required to ask his permission for all bishopric appointments. Upon the death of a bishop, their diocese was audited by imperial bureaucrats. Any churches that made a profit had it confiscated by the state. In AD 964, Nikephoros II banned land and money from being bequeathed to monasteries or churches. Two main reasons inspired the emperor to enforce these measures: his constant campaigning, costly failures in Sicily, and the expansion of the military all needed funding. Cutting down the amount of wealth going over to the church, that same wealth was to be used by the state. Secondly, Nikephoros II was a pious ascetic who was committed to a humble, religious lifestyle. Having wealthy monks and priests was anathema to his ideal of Christian piety. The single exception were, ironically, fellow ascetics and hermits whom the emperor sponsored. Amongst these hermits, called Laurai, was the emperor's uncle, St. Michael Melianos, and his disciple, St. Athanasius, whom acted as the emperor's spiritual advisor. The emperor was a major backer of Anastasius's great Lavra monastery on Mount Athos in Macedonia. The monastic institution he established there would result in Mount Athos being named the Holy Mountain. However, not every policy Nikephoros II tried to enforce on the church was implemented. In a notable instance, he asked the Patriarch Polyeuctus the following: "He endeavoured to establish a law that soldiers who died in war were to be accorded martyrs' honours, thus making the salvation of the soul uniquely and exclusively dependent on being in action on military service. He was pressing the patriarch and the bishops to agree to this doctrine, but some of them vigorously withstood him and frustrated his intent. They produced as evidence the canon of Basil the Great, which requires a man who has slain his enemy in battle to remain 3 years excommunicate. This incident, although fascinating, is never mentioned again. The emperor actually echoed the earlier concerns of Leo VI that the Eastern Roman Empire had no equivalent for the Islamic concept of jihad. Regardless of the motivation, the Orthodox Church could not conscience a holy war or holy warriors as a pious concept. War was to remain a necessary evil and nothing more. The hostility of Nikephoros II, roused with the Church by limiting its independence, was equalled by the increasing unrest amongst the populace towards the heavily militaristic character of his rule. Fights between his soldiers that were stationed in Constantinople and the public were frequent during his reign. In one instance, a fight broke out between Armenian mercenaries in Roman service and Roman sailors. The fight resulted in the death of a number of civilians, and the eparch of the city almost lost his life. On one occasion, Nikephoros II wanted his soldiers to perform a mock battle in the Hippodrome as a form of entertainment. However, the mock battle was as ferocious as a real one, which panicked the audience, thinking the soldiers might turn on them. Many civilians were crushed to death in the stampede or fell to their deaths after falling from the top rows. A few days later, as the emperor was returning from the Feast of the Ascension, he was heckled by spectators who threw stones at him. The emperor built a wall round the imperial palace because he was worried for his personal safety, demolishing people's houses and shops in the process. Quite a few laws from the reign of Nikephoros II survive. His first law addressed issues regarding the dozens of small frontier themes called Armenian themes along the eastern frontier. It reduced the amount of time allowed for Armenian thematic soldiers to reclaim abandoned land from 30 years to 3. This addressed the instability the previous rule had caused in the Armenian themes. It stopped Armenians leaving for very long periods of time, effectively abandoning their land, but putting people off acquiring it for fear of their return. An exception was made to allow the sons of soldiers to reclaim their property, regardless of to whom it had been given. However, any reclaimed lands that had built useful improvements, such as watermills, could be expected to receive compensation. Luxury buildings were left uncompensated. Armenian deserters that returned to the fold and had lost their land were to be compensated with property from elsewhere. In AD 966 to 967, Nikephoros II introduced a law altering the right of preemption over land introduced by Romanus I and Constantine VII for the poor and soldiers. Nikephoros II introduced a law altering the right of preemption over land concerning the poor and soldiers introduced by Romanus I and Constantine VII. The law barred the right of preemption from being used when a dynatost sold property, making the system a bit fairer. He also restricted abuse of the land reclamation law, stopping people reclaiming land that had been sold before the Great Famine of 924. An issue caused by the land laws of Romanus I was that the dynatoi that inherited land in a village and then built mansions on their land, which had been bought from the poor or soldiers, then had to demolish the stately homes and cart off the building materials before returning the land to the former owners. Nikephoros II introduced a law to offer a fairer alternative. A dynatos could keep the new land without demolishing the manor by paying double the price of the land to the former owner, or compensating them with land worth twice the value as that lost. A final law regarding soldiers' lands redresses issues caused by the law of Constantine VII on the same subject. He allowed soldiers to sell land that was valued at £4 of gold and had they sold land in the past, it could be reclaimed without compensation. However, this was having unjust consequences for buyers. Nikephoros II's solution was to introduce legislation that meant soldiers reclaiming land had to compensate the current owner if it was valued above £4 of gold. Nikephoros II made another stipulation that in all new instances, sellers followed the same principles but for land valued at £12 of gold instead of 4. It made it much harder for soldiers to sell military land. This was due to the increased number of cavalrymen and cataphracts Nikephoros II introduced into the military. This law is connected to a unique passage in John Zonaras, who says, "During his reign, there was no end of registrars, assessors, military officials, and those called protonotarioi dispatched into every last region, who oppressed his subjects with all manner of evils and drove them to the extremes of poverty, sparing not even the completely indignant. These they enlisted into the service of the public post, while those formerly subject to those charges then they reinscribed in the naval services. Sailors they turned into foot soldiers. Those previously of this station they counted among the cavalrymen. The cavalrymen they changed into heavy cavalrymen, and they imposed a heavier burden of military obligation on each one. It seemed as if he was enrolling every last one of his subjects into military service." The emperor was reshaping the Eastern Roman army into a more aggressive, campaigning force, but all of this required funding. Leo Phokas, as financial logothete, together with the emperor, introduced a number of fiscal policies in addition to the aforementioned punitive measures levelled against the church. New taxes were raised, requisitions for supplies were imposed. Leo the Deacon mentions that grain was bought by the government at a low price and then sold off at a much higher price to raise more money. Rogai payments to senators were partially reduced. These increases were substantial enough to make the Arabian geographer Ibn Hawaql blame the murder of Nikephoros II directly on the higher taxes and profiteering he introduced. In addition to the financial controls on the church, Nikephoros II introduced a major change in the Roman currency. Nikephoros II minted a new gold coin, the Taron. It was worth 1/12 the weight of gold of the main gold coin, the solidus, which was now renamed the Histemion. However, the Taron was valued the same as the Histemion, essentially a debased gold coin. The introduction of this type of coin caused distrust in the economy, since a person or the state could pay a sum using Tatara as if it were Histemena, despite being worth less. While the two coins remained in circulation until 1092, Nikephoros II made himself extremely unpopular for doing so. This coin may have caused a small amount of inflation, but profited the state in the short term because they did not have to use as much gold to mint Tatara as it had the Histemion. In June AD 967, Nikephoros II toured the fortresses of Thrace. This was in response to increased Magyar raids into the Balkans. Emperor Romanus II had already dealt with 2 incursions from them during his short reign. During his successor's reign, bands of Magyars also raided Thrace. The emperor decided to inspect the area and wrote a letter to Tsar Peter of Bulgaria asking him to prevent the Magyars from raiding Eastern Roman territory. John Zonaras records the Tsar's reply, stating, "When they came to us, you would not help us, but now we have been forced to make a treaty with them." Despite having been at peace with the Romans since 927, relations between the two countries had clearly started to break down over the Magyar issue. With the situation on the Balkan frontier deteriorating, a new strategy was needed. The Rus, who were to the north of the Roman themes in the Crimea, were threatening the imperial provinces. Nikephoros II decided to induce the Rus into attacking the Bulgars with a large payment of gold. In August 968, their Grand Prince Sviatoslav raided the Danube regions of Bulgaria, capturing Dristra. While diplomatic relations continued between the Eastern Roman and Bulgarian empires, the long peace they had enjoyed was coming to an end. In AD 695, the situation in the Balkans had changed upon the return of the emperor to Constantinople from his campaign against Antioch. The conquest of the Danube area by the Rus placed them in a collision course with the Eastern Roman Empire, and the death of the Tsar meant a potentially hostile Bulgaria. The emperor arranged a marriage alliance for Basil II and Constantine VIII to two of Tsar Boris II's daughters. However, Sviatoslav launched a full-scale invasion of Bulgaria with allies from the Magyars and Pechenegs. Together they defeated the Bulgarian army, captured the capital of Preslav, and reduced the Tsar to a vassal of the Grand Prince. In AD 968, there was a famine in the empire. This was normally bad enough, but was made worse when the emperor and his brother Leo sold grain at artificially high prices to raise extra money for the treasury. Profiteering off of starving people meant practically everyone loathed the emperor, and several Latin sources credit this incident for causing the demise of Nikephoros II. In October AD 968, the emperor himself and his army arrived in Cilicia, cut a path from Myafarakin to Antioch, and then from there to Emesa, deep in Syria, looting and destroying everything on their way. At Emesa, he gained possession of the head of St. John the Baptist, a highly prized holy relic. The Eastern Roman army then burned their way across to Tripoli, sacked Acre, and while returning from their punitive expedition, negotiated the surrender of Laodicea, establishing a new Armenian theme. Upon arrival at the Bagarus Pass near Antioch, the army built a fort blockading the city. Michael Boutzes and Peter the Eunuch were placed in command of 1,500 soldiers to ravage the area around Antioch and maintain the blockade. Meanwhile, Nikephoros II returned to Constantinople, arriving there by the beginning of the next year. While the emperor was away, Michael Boutzes disobeyed his orders, inducing a guard to betray the city of Antioch. During the night, he sneaked a force up a ladder, then captured a tower. The Romans held the tower 3 days from attacks by the defenders. On the 28th of October, Peter the Eunuch finally decided to help Boutzes and was let into the city by friendly troops. Boutzes went in person to tell the emperor about his conquest of Antioch, but was dismissed from service for insubordination. On the same day, Caesar Bardus, Nikephoros II's father, died aged 90. The last notable act of the emperor's reign was his elaborate assassination. On the night of the 10th of December, AD 969, Nikephoros II was murdered by a conspiracy of army officers, including John Tzimiskes, Michael Boutzes, and 4 others, with the Empress Theophano being an accessory to the murder. As might be expected, there are many accounts of the murder, and just as many reasons for explaining it. The salient points are as follows. There were 2 main motives for the assassination. Tzimiskes and his other officers had grievances against Nikephoros II and the Phokas family. Tzimiskes' own ambition had been checked in AD 965 by the emperor by being dismissed from service. The other element was the estrangement between the Empress Theophano and Nikephoros II, which seems why matters came to a head specifically in AD 969. In Skylitzes' version, Theophano was sexually frustrated due to the neglect of her husband and came to loathe him, having fallen in love with John Tzimiskes instead. She wanted him to take the throne and be with her. In Yahya and Zonaras' version, the brother of the emperor, Bardus Phokas, was plotting to castrate Basil II and Constantine VIII and declare Leo Phokas the heir to Nikephoros II. She allied with John Tzimiskes more as a desperate move to save her children than anything else. The evidence for a love affair is also conspicuously absent. Once again we are presented with the good and evil portraits of Theophano, portraits that have dogged her entire historical record. Since all of these accounts are based upon rumours and propaganda, it is difficult to discern the facts. Perhaps some stock can be placed in the fact that the later historians, Yahya of Antioch, Michael Psellus, and John Zonaras, considered both the rumours of a love affair and a threat to eliminate her children as valid. There are two main versions of the plot. Leo the Deacon and Yahya of Antioch state that soon after the funeral of Caesar Bardus, the Empress Theophano begged her husband to release John Zimisces from his house arrest, return to Constantinople, resume his duties, and seek a new wife after Maria Sclerina, his first wife, died of illness. The emperor agreed and summoned John to Constantinople. Together, Theophano and he spent time preparing the plot, meeting in secret and smuggling the conspirators into the palace. On the 10th of December, Theophano persuaded Nikephoros to leave his bedchamber unlocked so she could visit him later. The assassins entered the emperor's room and murdered him. John Skylitzes says that Zimisces arrived in Chalcedon and was refused entry to Constantinople by the emperor. During the night, the empress brought him and his 5 conspirators into the port near the palace and hauled them up in a basket. Then they immediately proceeded to break into the emperor's bedchamber and murdered him. Both versions converge concerning the assassination. The assassins found Nikephoros II sleeping on the floor on top of a bearskin and blanket. John kicked him to wake him up, and then an assassin, Leo Ablantes, struck him on the forehead with his sword. Dazed, they hauled him over to Zimisces, who shouted abuse at him. Zimisces then pulled at his beard while the others smashed his jaw with their sword handles. Hearing that the imperial guards were approaching, the assassins drove their swords into his body and cut off his head. John Zimisces proclaimed himself emperor and negotiated with the patriarch to legitimize his position. The day after the assassination, the Empress Theophano was sent into exile on the island of Prote. So much for Nikephoros Phokas. Nikephoros II, like many great figures in history, was a controversial one. His reign saw improved efficiency and greater state finances to fund constant aggressive warfare. He safeguarded the emperors Basil II and Constantine VIII. His laws sought to keep the wealth of the church in check and addressed a number of outstanding social issues from his day in a just manner. He sponsored the Great Lavra Monastery, a major monastic institution whose legacy continues to this day. The military was increased in size, expanding the corps of cataphracts and adding dozens new Armenian thieves. He also introduced the ducal command of Chaldea. Furthermore, he authored a military manual, the Praeceptor Militaria, improving the military education of his commanders. The attempts of the new Holy Roman Emperor to take over northern Italy were rebuffed at every turn. Beneath this blaze of triumph and success lay a darker side to his reign, profiteering in the face of famine at the expense of ordinary people, temporarily destabilizing the monetary economy with the Tertateron, a growing paranoia and unchecked military favoritism that often backfired on civilians. By the end of his reign, he needed a wall to protect him from his own people. The serial failures in Sicily, as well as his own usurpation of power, all speak of the iron and bloodshed he promised Joseph Bringas when he took the throne. It is said that by 968 he was hated by all men and everybody longed to see his fall. Yet, in just 6 years, he achieved a huge amount as emperor. The Emperor Nikephoros III even claimed to be a descendant of his, and for generations after his death, he was remembered as one of the great soldier emperors of the Eastern Roman Empire. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like and subscribe. Thank you to my generous patrons for your support. The next video will be about the reign of John Zimisces, and this has been Eastern Roman History.